Hello and welcome to our final video in this Photoshop tutorial series. In the first two videos we have covered the cutting out, removing of backgrounds, general document setup and some of the interface and some of the tools we have available in Photoshop. In the second one we covered blend modes and image adjustments, and in this final one we're going to be covering blending options and filters. So what we'd just done in the last video is we'd added a little bit of shadow around our cutout to increase the contrast. We'd played around a little bit with some of the image corrections. We also changed the background a little bit to just increase that contrast, and we played around with some of the blend modes. So we've got our texture over there, and we've also changed the blend mode on the cutout itself just so that some of the background shows through and enhances that dramatic effect. So in this one, what we're going to do is we are going to go and add our sort of stadium floodlights and just finish off this image with the background there. So we're going to go across to our layers panel and add a new layer, which we will call floodlight. Right, once we've done that, we want to select a brush tool, and we probably want a brush that's around this size, so probably 175. We want it to be a full 100% opacity, and we want to make sure we have pure white selected. And what we're going to do with our floodlight layer selected is just draw one click right in the middle there. And the reason it's in the middle, we are going to move this, but if I decided to draw my floodlight where we originally intended to, and then I decide to copy that and paste it, I end up with this white line where the edge of the artboard was. So although we're going to move them, we want to draw that original floodlight right in the middle there. So this is our floodlight on its individual layer. What we'll do is we'll move that right just now, and we've got that sat on top of our white gradient layer. So we'll move it up to around there, maybe a little bit more off to the left. So we want to hit Command C, Command V, or Control C and Control V, and we just want to paste another one right next to it. You see that's duplicated the layer. And we want to do that again, keeping them roughly an equal distance apart because of the way they sort of blend and fade out. You're not going to get them exact, but as long as they look roughly like they're right next to each other. And we're going to do that once more. So we've got a set of 4 that look like they make up a sort of stadium floodlight. Now once we have our 4, maybe a bit there will do. Once we have our 4, we want to select all 4 of these layers. Now what we're going to do once we've selected these 4 is put them all into one group. Now grouping layers is done by hitting this little folder icon in the bottom right. So if I select that to create a group, we now have a group called Group 1. And what we'll do is rename that Floodlights, or Floodlight, should I say. Now an important thing to note about using groups within the layers panel is that by default, I think Photoshop is set up to select groups over layers. And so what I mean by that is that at the moment this group is selected, and if I move it, it moves all 4 of the objects within that group. Now that is controlled by this little drop down in the top left hand corner. So where we have our auto select, which we pretty much always want selected, in the drop down we have group or layer. Now if I have that set to layer and I select the group and try to move it, it will move the top layer within that group. It automatically selects just one of the objects within there. So we don't really want that whilst we're playing with something that we've grouped together already. So what we want to do is make sure that we have that set to group. And that doesn't affect us moving any other individual layers. That'll still always allow us to select an individual layer on its own and move it. But if we're selecting a group or a folder, it will select everything that's in that. So with that done, we want to keep a selection of our group, and again we want to hit Command C and Command V, and we want to paste our other 4 lights, and we want to keep them in line with these ones, but to give it a bit of a different sort of asymmetrical look, we'll move this one slightly off to the side so that it doesn't look too symmetrical. Maybe about there. Now that looks a little bit strange at the moment, but once we add our lighting features to it, you'll see why the asymmetrical look gives it a bit more of a natural appearance. We have our floodlights, and now what we want to do is we're going to look at something new, which is in the filter tab up here. Now at the moment, with no layers selected, everything's grayed out. So again, we want to go up to the top and create a new layer on top of our floodlight layer. Now what we're going to create is a lens flare. So we want to hit filter, and we want to go down to render, and then into lens flare. Now the reason that's come up is because it's a completely empty layer. So you can't apply a lens flare to a layer that is empty. So what we want to do is we want to go over to our little color selection, pick a black color, and we want to go to our paint bucket tool, and we want to fill this layer completely black on top. And whilst we're at it, I'll rename that lens flare. Now we can apply our lens flare to this layer. So we'll go back to filter, render, lens flare. Now what this does is it brings up a little tab which allows you to dictate the settings of your lens flare. Now what we can do in here is we can actually select our brightness point and move that to wherever we want it to appear on our artboard. So we want to aim for approximately where we place our floodlights, which is around there. Now we can always change this by resizing the layer once we've done it. So if you don't get it exactly spot on, it's not the end of the world. And we're going to go, you have a few different selections here. We're going to go with 105mm prime. And that's just because in terms of a floodlight, it probably is the most realistic looking one of the 4 options. So we'll go for that 105mm prime, and we want it to be slightly brighter than that. We maybe go for something like 130. See how that looks. So if we hit OK on that, this just applies it to that black layer. Now this is where we go back to our blend modes, and we change the blend mode for this layer with the black background to screen. Now that gets rid of the black in this and just leaves the lens flare itself. We're not exactly on our floodlight there, so what I'm going to do is just move that layer up, and I might make it slightly bigger just to increase that brightness effect. And then we want to pop the centre of that probably on that second floodlight in, maybe just to give it again a bit of that asymmetrical appearance. And you can see how that gives quite a natural look, or a realistic look, to what a floodlight might be like in the background. Now with the lens flare, it emulates some light spots. So we don't necessarily want these two down the bottom because they don't look that in place. So what we're going to do is just grab our eraser tool with our lens flare layer selected, and we'll just erase those. Because they're so far down the bottom, it doesn't look unnatural to get rid of them there. So that's one of our lens flares. And what we want to do is add another one on the right hand side here. Now this typically isn't necessarily a realistic application of a lens flare, because you would usually only, if you were taking a photograph, have one in one direction. But it provides a really natural looking glow, so we're going to use it again on this left hand side for the other floodlight. So we'll create a new layer again, lens flare 2, we'll call this layer. And again, we'll fill that layer black. Then we'll go to filter, render, lens flare. And we've already got our settings, although we might make this one slightly less bright. Probably want to move it a little bit higher because we were a wee bit short on the last one. So move it up a little bit higher. We'll maybe, I'm going to call it 120. We'll click OK there. And then with this layer selected, back down to our screen. And there, that looks probably quite good. I think maybe move it just over left so that you see, over to the right, sorry, so that you see that floodlight on the left just a little bit out on its own. Again, we want to get our eraser tool, and with that layer selected, just remove the little light spot down the bottom left. Now again, we have two light spots showing up here, and that's not a very natural look. We probably want to retain this one, seeing as it's the bigger length of light spots in the flare. So to change this one, if I select this in the eraser tool and erase that, it won't necessarily work because of the natural glow that is around that lens flare. So what we want to do is use this tool, the clone stamp tool. And what this allows you to do is pick a selection on your layer. So if you hit Alt on the Mac or Control on the PC, it gives you this little target icon. Now that is you picking your point of reference that you're going to cover. So if I select here, somewhere that's kind of an equal distance from the center of our lens flare around the radius, that is selected this point here, and wherever I click next, that is going to cover. So I've selected that point up there, and I'm using this part to cover it. I actually don't think that's worked particularly well because it's a little bit too light. So we'll maybe try and pick somewhere like here. And that's probably a little bit better there. Pick there. And that's quite natural. So obviously, if you don't get it correct the first time, you can Control Z to undo, but you can also try picking different areas to make sure you get that replacement bit looking as natural as you can do. It's a tool that takes a bit of playing about to get used to, but so we have our floodlights in the background. Now what we want to do is finish this off with a little bit of text. So if you select the text tool on the left hand side, this automatically creates a new layer if you're to draw a text box. So you're creating the text box there, it's automatically created a new layer, and we're going to go double click that and hit name. Now by default, Photoshop fills text boxes with dummy text. So just select all of that, and we want to type Dennis Rodman. Now maybe go for a name that's quite small and a number that's quite big. So again, you can be as creative as you like with this, and it sort of comes down to personal preference. I quite like the font Railway. I've been using that a lot recently. Maybe go a bit smaller, down to 30. And we'll make the surname, we'll bold that up a little bit. One of the options that we have for text is we can play about with the way that the text is sort of distributed and the way the sort of lines or the line spacing and everything like that, and the character size and the slant. So what we want to do is go to this little tab on the right hand side called character. It should be an A with a line next to it. If character isn't visible on the right hand side, if you go to window and down to character, it should pop up there. So with this open, there are a variety of different things that we can change about the appearance of the text. So obviously there's line spacing, text size. We've got the tracking, which is the distance basically between each of the letters. You've got a variety of different options here: extra bold, italic, all caps, low caps, small caps. What we want to do is we want to go to the tracking and we want to hit something like 250. Now again, this is just personal preference, but it gives it a quite nice sort of cinematic style spaced out text. Just move that up. Might go a little bit bigger than that actually, 300. And just to make sure that that text is in the middle, when I'm double clicking on it, I'll set the text box to the width of the artboard. I'll make sure I've got my center justification on, and that should be that sat directly in the middle there. It just looks a little bit off center because of the subject, but that is that sat directly in the middle. Now what we want to do is add our number. So if we go over to our type tool again, we're going to make a larger text box there. And what Photoshop naturally does is it tends to follow the same sort of settings that you had for your last text box. So we're going to set the tracking to 0, and I'm going to change the font to Alternate Gothic. It's quite a tall font, so that'll suit the number better if we're going to make it quite large. Now I think we'll go really big with this one, and we'll type our number in there, and we're going to change that to white. Now that's centered, but given the way that the 9 and the 1 look, we want to change what's called the kerning, which basically is how close the letters and numbers are to each other, but you would see a better effect over a full passage of text. And it basically, if we go to optical, it makes it nicer for reading, whereas metric is more based on the actual dimensions of the number itself. So we have our text selected there. Now, I think 1296 is the biggest that we can actually make our text. But what we can do is we can rasterize this layer. Now, if we right click on this and go up to rasterize type, that flattens the layer to an image layer. So instead of being able to alter the text, we'll now be stuck with that. So once you rasterize a type layer, you can't go back and edit the text on it. So it just behaves like an image layer now. So we want to move that to the center, and we'll use these guides to see that. And we want to make it even bigger. I'll maybe make it something like this. Now that doesn't look particularly good as it is, so I'll drop the name on the top there. So what we want to do is we want to play with some of our blending options. Now these are different to blend modes, and they're applied specifically to the layer. So if I right click on the number 91 layer again and go right up the top to blending options, it'll open up a small window with a variety of different effects that we can apply just to this layer. So I'm going to have a look at stroke and select that. Now what that's done there is added a line around the current selection. Now that's not as clear to see at the moment because obviously we've added a white line around white text, but if I were to change the colour of that to red, you can see that we've added a stroke to our letter in there, and we can change the size of that. We can make it as thick or as non-existent as we want. If it's down to 0, you don't see it, but we'll have it approximately 10. And now what we want to do is go to inner shadow. Now this automatically has picked up my last default settings, but if we hit inner shadow, basically if I take the stroke off and show you, inner shadow gives you a little bit of depth to the layer. It doesn't apply to the stroke because the stroke's an additional blending option on top of that. So we've got our inner shadow there selected. Now over here, again, we can change the blend mode of just the shadow. Now because the background's white there, that's not going to make much of a difference for a black inner shadow. But we can play around with a variety of different things like the opacity. So we can make that quite dark. But I think as it was, we'll keep it around 50%. Now these three sliders here, the distance, the choke and the size, all affect the appearance of the shadow. So I like to keep the choke fairly low as it means a more gradual shadow. The distance, we can vary that up quite a bit, but I think where it looks at the moment, you kind of get the impression the light is coming from one side, and that's quite a nice effect. The size, the bigger you go with the size, the more blurring you get over a large distance. So you kind of just judge that based on what you think looks best at the time. So we're going to hit OK on that with those two selected. So what we're going to do is drop our 91 layer down to the very bottom, just behind our cutout. Now what we get there is the blend modes sort of complementing each other, so that you get that kind of look where you've got a bit of the black and white coming through from the number behind, but you also have the effect of the background and the gradient. So I might make that slightly bigger. And what I might do is just hold shift and compress it in a little bit, just to give it a little bit of a taller look. I tend not to do that, but given it's only the one number, we can get away with it quite a bit. I want to just lock these layers. Don't want to move those. We'll take our number and we just want to center our number on the image there. And I might just select our shadows layer and our cutout layer. And now we've got the flexibility again to kind of resize that and place that maybe so that we kind of line up some of his facial features in between the numbering. We'll hit OK. So one of the last things we want to do, there's a couple of small changes we'll probably make, but now that we know and are aware about the blending options, maybe we want to go into our cutout itself and maybe see if there are any blending options that will give this a little bit of a better effect. One I sometimes like to use is an outer glow. Now that is similar to the inner shadow that we used and very similar to inner glow, in that the difference with the shadow is you pick basically which direction the light is coming from, so you get like a shadow greater on one side than you would the other. But if you use an outer glow or an inner glow, it goes around the perimeter of the whole image and emits the same glow all the way around, Now the settings I've got on here, again, I've picked up from the last time as default, but they're pretty similar to the inner shadow that we did. We've got an opacity of 50%, no spread, quite a great size on it because we want it to be a very gradual emission of that shadow from behind them. So if I turn it off again, you see the difference that makes in sort of bringing him out from the background. So turn that on, and if we play about with the size, the lower that goes, the less sort of dramatic it is and the less realistic it looks. So that kind of black line around him there, that very, very thin black line, doesn't really do our graphic justice. So we want to go up quite high with it. Maybe set it at around 200. Now, if we think that that's maybe not dramatic enough, we can increase the opacity so that we're darkening that down quite a bit. So we'll maybe leave that at around 71. Now, there are a variety of other sort of blending options that we can use here, but things like the stroke wouldn't necessarily be as applicable maybe to this graphic, but you can see you can get that type of effect around a cutout if we selected stroke. Bevel and emboss, again, not very applicable to this graphic, but if you were to make something, whether it's text or an object, try and look 3D, then you would maybe use the bevel and emboss. Color overlay, again, probably not applicable, but that'll take the entire layer that you have and just apply whichever color you wanted there. So if I wanted to change that to sort of red, it just changes the whole image to red, everything that it picks up. So we're almost there in finishing this off. We'll probably make a couple of little tweaks maybe to the text. I might actually move this 91 even below the dark gradient at the bottom just so that it fades out a little bit behind his cutout there. We'll maybe increase the size of this a little bit. It probably looks just a wee bit too small. And we'll pop that up. And we'll maybe give it a little bit of an underline. So if I wanted to give something an underline, I'll just create a new layer. And if I go to the second top tool here, the rectangular marquee tool, and draw roughly the width of a line, again we can move this. And we'll go and select our paint bucket tool, and we'll reverse these colours so that we have the red selected. And we'll give that a bit of a red line. We'll hit Command D to deselect. And then we can move our underline layer to wherever we think it looks best. And what we'll do, as well as we have that selected, we'll give the line a little bit of a fade out on either side. So we'll take our eraser tool. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, but is important to know, if you can't see the size of your brush for whatever reason, at this moment, it's only showing me the little crosshair. It's because you've got caps lock selected in your keyboard. So if you take caps lock off, it'll show you the size of your brush again. And that's a helpful tip to know, because sometimes it's very difficult to work out why something isn't showing as it should. So to blend off the end here, all we're going to do is just one wee click and just hide that end. And again, on this side, we'll do the same. Now we can play about with the dynamics of that line, whether we want it to be, probably it'd be slightly smaller, so not as thick. So just hold shift, we'll decrease the size of that. One final change that I would quite like to add is maybe just changing this white gradient that's at the top and extending that downwards just to increase the brightness at the top there, and that maybe just make some of the reds that are on his shoulder slightly more subtle. With that final change made, the rest of the design really is entirely up to you. With the blending modes and the blending options that I've shown you, you can be as creative as you like with changing this up or changing the text size or text display. You might not be a fan of the big number or small names, so you can be as creative as you like in your own graphics. One thing I do want to show you, and it goes back to the importance of when we set up our document initially is selecting artboards. So if you wanted to make this a series of graphics, what you can do is click artboard in the top here. You hold Alt or hold Control till you get this sort of double mouse thing showing up, and you want to select, and you can drag off a duplicate artboard off to the side. Now this gives you the flexibility to create multiple graphics in the same style without going through the whole process twice. So if, for instance, I wanted to change this to Michael Jordan, and I wanted to change up the number and the cutout, I wouldn't have near as much work to do. So this is the tutorial set I created earlier before I went on through this process again of filming it. So you'll see how effective it can be to use artboards and basically duplicate the work that you've already done and make some slight changes so you can produce a full graphics set if that is something you're looking to do. So I want to thank you all for joining this tutorial, and if you've made it as far as this, then thank you for sticking with it. It is the first tutorial series that I've ever done, so I appreciate I might not have got it absolutely right all the way through, but I would also welcome any of your feedback, and if you're happy to stick a comment in the video down below and just let me know what you thought or how you got on with the tutorial, then it would be really great to hear. Hopefully you've managed to pick something up. If there's anything that I didn't cover that you maybe want to have a little bit more information on, or there's something that I did cover that wasn't quite well enough explained, then please also let me know and I will try my best to help you through with that. So I'll hopefully see you all on another tutorial in the future, but in the meantime, keep practicing and thank you for joining.